It's good to stop here and remind ourselves for a second that costs in the long run are different than costs in the short run. The typical U-shaped average cost curves are a short-run picture, and whenever you see both variable costs and fixed costs on the same diagram, or variable costs being different than total costs, then you know you're dealing with the short run. In the long run, all of our inputs are variable, so all of our costs are in some sense variable as well. And the other difference between the short run and the long run is that the law of diminishing marginal product does not hold in the long run. If we give our workers more tools, there's no reason to think that it should be necessarily harder for them to squeeze more output out of the, harder for us to squeeze more output out of the last worker. Remember the logic behind the law of diminishing marginal product. When we think about apple orchards, when we send the first person out to pick apples in the orchard, they can pick all the low apples. If we send out the sixth person, by then the low apples are gone, and so they have to climb higher and higher up in the tree, and it takes longer and longer to pick apples. Now, we can solve this problem by, instead of sending 6 workers to the same orchard, we send 6 workers to 6 different orchards so that they all have low-hanging fruit to pick. So the law of diminishing marginal product is a short-run concept. We had a fixed amount of apple orchard to pick from. But if we vary the amount of apple orchard to pick from, then there's no reason to think that the law of marginal product should continue to hold in the long run. So let's think a little bit more about the long run and consider a firm that can build a small, medium, or large manufacturing plant, or if you wanted to think about it as a small, medium, or large apple orchard. And we can think that once they decide what size of an orchard or what size of a manufacturing plant to build, they're going to put themselves onto a short-run average cost curve. And if they build a small one, the way we represent this in our diagram is average total cost subscript S. ATC subscript M represents a medium-sized manufacturing plant, and ATCL represents a large manufacturing plant. So they can build a small, medium, or large manufacturing plant, but once they do, they move from the long run into the short run. Once they choose their level of capital, then in the short run, they're going to be on whatever size manufacturing plant that they've built. So they'll be on one of the short-run average total cost curves. The short-run average total cost curves are represented by the blue, green, and purple line. But in the long run, if they can choose which one they want to be on, they can be on the red line at the bottom, the long-run average total cost curve, which is given by the envelope representing the bottom of each of the short-run total cost curves. So in the long run, they can adjust their capital stock. If their output that they want to produce is something less than QA, then the cheapest way to do it is with a small manufacturing plant. If their output is between QA and QB, the cheapest way to do it is with a medium-sized manufacturing plant. And if their output is larger than QB, then the cheapest way to do it, you can see, is with a large manufacturing plant. So the red lines at the bottom of the average total cost curves represents the long-run average total cost. Now, if we think about sort of a much larger horizon where they don't have to necessarily build small, medium, or large, but they could choose from a continuum of plant sizes, often what we find is firms that have an average cost curve that looks something like what's shown in this diagram here. That in early stages with very small plant sizes, that they can reduce their average costs through efficiency, through specialization, or there are often lots of reasons why larger can be better, why building a bigger plant can lead you to lower costs of production. But eventually we might suspect that they get to what's called the minimum efficient scale, which is the lowest level of output that yields the least average cost per unit. And then we can think about stretching that out over some range where they can essentially replicate what they're doing. This part is what might be considered constant returns to scale, where they can continue to grow the size of their business along with the formula that they have in place. One way to think about this is with Subway franchises. Subway can reduce costs by having a lot of stores, but by and large they get to a point where if they want to add another store, they're going to do it with roughly the same cost of production as all the ones that came before it. And they can do this over a very long range of output. This period is what we might think of as constant returns to scale, where continuing to grow by adding both capital and labor in a relatively constant proportion can leave you with a constant level of average costs. You can also imagine that at some point the organization will become too large, will become big and begin to experience diseconomies of scale. And even McDonald's has gone through this. Even Starbucks has gone through this, where they've gotten too big and they've had to cut back a little bit on the rate of expansion and think maybe differently about what they did, because it becomes to be too expensive to find new locations to locate stores. And so when organizations become too large to manage, or land and locations becomes scarce to the point where it gets harder and harder for them to locate near their customers, they may eventually experience diseconomies of scale. Other kinds of organizations can experience this at even a much smaller level. So to define, economies of scale occur when the firm's average costs are falling. And this can happen when specialization creates efficiencies. When assigning workers to different tasks and using specialized labor can create efficiencies. It becomes easier to combine. It becomes easier and more efficient to combine the way we produce goods and services. Constant returns to scale occur when a firm can essentially replicate what it's doing. You increase capital and labor used in production, and you can replicate it over a fairly long horizon, perhaps. The example we used on the last slide was fast food franchises, where each location can produce at similar cost to the others. Diseconomies of scale occur when the firm's average total costs are rising, and this occurs often due to challenges in managing and coordinating large organizations. Sometimes it becomes difficult to be competitive when organizations become too large.